You know Mesopotamia. You know Sumer. You know Babylon. You probably know Assyria. Here is the civilization that fought all of them for 3,000 years, and that almost no history class has ever mentioned. They were called Elam. Their capital was Susa, one of the oldest cities on Earth. They had writing at the same time as the Sumerians, possibly earlier. They built ziggurats. They controlled the mountain passes that connected Mesopotamia to the rest of the ancient world. And for 30 centuries, they were the most persistent, most dangerous, and most resilient enemy that Mesopotamia ever faced. They destroyed cities. They kidnapped kings. They stole the most famous law code in history and kept it as a trophy for 800 years. And today, almost nobody knows their name. To understand Elam, you need to understand the geography. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was the breadbasket of the ancient world. Flat, fertile, dependent on irrigation. But the resources it needed, tin, copper, lapis lazuli, timber, did not come from the flat plains. They came from the mountains, and the mountains were Elamite territory. The land of Elam occupied roughly what is now the southwest corner of Iran, the fertile lowlands of Khuzestan, and the mountain ranges rising behind them. Susa, their capital, sat at the edge of the plains, positioned perfectly to control the trade between the mountains and the river cities. Whatever Mesopotamia needed from the east had to pass through or near Elamite territory. This created a relationship that was simultaneously commercial and military, cooperative and explosive, and never fully resolved. Sometimes Elam traded with Mesopotamia. Sometimes Elam raided it. Sometimes Elam ruled parts of it. Sometimes Mesopotamia ruled Elam. For 3,000 years, neither could definitively defeat the other. The earliest Elamite writing, called Proto-Elamite, dates to around 3,200 BC. It has never been deciphered. It is possibly the oldest undeciphered writing system on Earth. We know it existed, we can see the tablets, and we cannot read a single word. Whatever the Elamites said about themselves in their earliest records, we cannot hear it. What we can hear is what their enemies said about them. When Sargon of Akkad created the world's first empire around 2334 BC, he conquered Elam and made it a vassal state. The Elamites revolted. Sargon's successors fought them repeatedly. The Akkadian Empire eventually collapsed from internal pressures, drought, and the constant drain of fighting people on every frontier, including Elam. The city of Ur rose to become the dominant power in Mesopotamia under its third dynasty. Ur was the city of the moon god Nana, one of the jewels of the ancient world. Wealthy, culturally sophisticated, administratively complex. And in 2004 BC, the Elamites, allied with a group called the Amorites, sacked it. The destruction of Ur was one of the great catastrophes of the ancient world. The survivors wrote laments about it, and those laments survive. The lament for the destruction of Ur is one of the oldest literary texts in human history. It describes the city burning, the temples destroyed, the people killed or enslaved. The last king of Ur, a man named Ibai-Sin, was taken back to Elam in chains. He died there. Elam did not occupy Mesopotamia as a permanent ruler. They raided, took what they wanted, and withdrew. This was the pattern. Devastating strikes followed by return to their own territory, leaving Mesopotamia to slowly rebuild and then become a target again. Babylon rose. Hammurabi unified Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule around 1760 BC. He defeated Elam militarily and pushed them back. He created the famous law code that bears his name, engraved on a stone stele displayed publicly for all to see. The law of the land, permanent and magnificent. 400 years later, an Elamite king named Shutruk-Nahunte came to collect it. Shutruk-Nahunte ruled Elam around 1185 BC. He was one of the most aggressive and successful conquerors in Elamite history. He launched a series of raids deep into Babylonia, sacking cities, taking prisoners, and carrying off monuments. He took the victory stele of Naram-Sin, the great Akkadian king. He took the stele of Hammurabi. He brought them back to Susa as trophies of Elamite power, symbols that the rulers of Mesopotamia were subject to Elamite will. The stele of Hammurabi sat in Susa for roughly 800 years. When French archaeologists excavated Susa in the early 20th century, they found it there. It is now in the Louvre in Paris. It survived, intact, legible, one of the most important artifacts in the history of human civilization, because an Elamite king stole it. Without that theft, without that Elamite raid, it might have been broken up, melted down, lost in the centuries of conflict that followed. The Elamites preserved it by accident of conquest. The Neo-Assyrian Empire rose in the 9th century BC and began its systematic campaign to dominate the entire Near East. Assyria was one of the most militarized states the ancient world had ever seen. Its armies used iron weapons, siege machinery, and organized logistics at a scale that no previous civilization had attempted, and they collided with Elam repeatedly. The wars between Assyria and Elam spanned nearly 3 centuries. They fought over Babylonia, which both powers wanted to control. Sometimes Elam supported Babylonian resistance to Assyria. Sometimes Elam attacked Babylonia itself. The politics shifted constantly, but the fighting never stopped. In 694 BC, the Assyrian king Sennacherib, the same king who destroyed Babylon in a fit of rage, attacked Babylonia. The Elamites intervened. There were naval battles on the marshes. There were land engagements across the flat plains. Elam managed to check Assyrian expansion temporarily, but Assyria kept coming. Under Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian king, the pressure on Elam became overwhelming. In 653 BC, at the Battle of Ulai River, Ashurbanipal defeated the Elamite forces decisively, and in 646 BC, he sacked Susa. The sack of Susa was one of the most thorough destructions in the ancient world. Ashurbanipal's own records describe it in detail, and Assyrian kings were not modest about their violence. He recorded that he scattered the dust of the Elamite royal tombs over their territory. He boasted that he had condemned the ghosts of Elamite kings to eternal restlessness, deprived of offerings, deprived of peace. He carried off the statues of Elamite gods. He salted the agricultural fields. Elam, as a major independent power, never recovered. But here is the strange afterlife. Within a century of Susa's destruction, a new power rose from the Iranian plateau to the east, the Persians. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which would become the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, absorbed Elam into its foundations. The Persians adopted Elamite administrative systems. They used Elamite scribes. Elamite was one of the 3 official languages of the Persian Empire, alongside Old Persian and Babylonian, inscribed on the royal monuments at Persepolis. The Persian kings ruled from Susa, the former Elamite capital, which they rebuilt and made one of their 4 great royal cities. The administrative machinery that ran the largest empire in the world was built largely on Elamite precedent. Elam did not disappear. It transformed. It became the skeleton inside the Persian Empire that nobody notices because the exterior is so impressive. And then the Greeks came. Alexander the Great destroyed the Persian Empire. The Greeks wrote the history of the region, and they wrote about Persia, about Babylon, about Egypt. Elam was already ancient history by then, absorbed, transformed, its name fading from use. The Choga Zanbil ziggurat still stands in southwestern Iran. It was built by the Elamite king Untashna-Pyresha around 1250 BC. It is one of the best preserved ziggurats anywhere in the world. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Most people who know what a ziggurat is have never heard of the people who built this one. 3,000 years of fighting. Writing that predates almost everything else we can read. A capital city that became a Persian royal seat. A law code preserved by the people who stole it. A language still not fully understood. And a name that barely makes it into most history books. The next time someone tells you that ancient history is the story of Egypt and Mesopotamia, remember that for 3,000 years, there was a third player at the table. To the east, in the mountains, with writing of their own and armies of their own, and a resilience that outlasted empires. They were called Elam, and history forgot their name.